The steel blade sank deep into the old king's chest with a horrific, wet thud, shattering a 30-year peace in a single heartbeat. Imagine a son kneeling in absolute darkness over the breathless body of his father, his desperate hands soaked in a warm, damning crimson while the real murderer steps back into the shadows with a cold smile. General Varric stared into the flickering torches of the approaching royal guard, caught in the jaws of an impossible frame. His own brother had just traded a father's life for a stolen crown, leaving Varric to face an executioner's rope for a crime he didn't commit. They said no man could ever survive a betrayal this deep, that the truth would rot inside the castle dungeons long before dawn. But at sunrise, Varric would not beg for his life. He would demand a terrifying reckoning that would shake the very foundations of the empire and expose a dark, ancient secret buried for 100 generations. If this ultimate betrayal has your heart pounding and you want to see if justice can survive a kingdom of lies, take 1 second right now to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment saying, "I am here till the end." Your support allows us to create these massive cinematic stories, so join our community today. What truly happened in those shadowed chambers during the final, gasping breath of the old king? Why would a brother, bound by blood and centuries of shared battlefields, choose to tear his own family apart for a crown of gold? The entire kingdom stood on the precipice of an absolute abyss, whispering tense questions in the dark castle corridors, wondering what monstrous truth lay beneath the official story shouted from the ramparts. The air inside the grand capital grew thick with a chilling, silent suspense as the high elders looked toward the bleak northern horizon, sensing that the dramatic trial about to take place within the castle walls was merely a distraction from a much larger, more terrifying shadow creeping toward their gates. Before the blood dried on the palace stones, General Varric was the undisputed shield of the realm. For over 20 years, he rode at the right hand of his father, King Malachar, defending the outer borders from the horrific things that howled in the frozen wastes. The people loved him deeply, not because he wore fine silks, but because his heavy iron armor was dented by the weapons of their bitterest enemies. He dreamed of a peaceful kingdom, a land where his aging father could finally rest his heavy head without the constant, suffocating fear of invasion. His relationship with his younger brother, Corin, had always been a fragile, brittle thing, built on a foundation of jealousy and whispered rivalries in the palace corridors, but Varric fiercely believed that when the time came, blood would always defend blood. He feared only one thing, that the fragile peace they had fought so hard to secure would crumble from within, leaving the innocent completely defenseless against the dark. He did not see the subtle shifts in the royal court, the quiet, late-night meetings between Corin and the High Lords, or the way the palace servants began to look away in fear whenever he walked past. The tragic foreshadowing of his downfall was written in every cold shoulder and every abrupt silence in the royal gardens, a silent storm gathering over a man who only knew how to fight enemies he could see face to face. The turning point came with the sudden, haunting toll of the midnight bell, a sound that usually signaled the changing of the guard but now carried the heavy weight of absolute doom. Varric had been summoned to his father's private quarters by a frantic, anonymous note, his heart pounding violently against his ribs as he raced through the winding stone staircases. When he burst through the heavy oak doors, the room was deathly quiet, the only sound being the rhythmic dripping of blood onto the cold floor. King Malachar lay slumped against his heavy desk, the ancient jeweled dagger of their lineage buried deep in his chest. Varric dropped to his knees, his hands moving instinctively to stanch the wound, crying out in a voice broken by sudden, agonizing grief. "Father, no, look at me, stay with me. Who did this to you?" But the old king's eyes were already glassy, reflecting the flickering candle fire as his spirit departed. That was when the hidden side door creaked open, and Corin stepped into the room, surrounded by a dozen heavily armed guards. "Look at him," Corin whispered, his voice dripping with a calculated, theatrical horror. "Caught with the murder weapon in his hands. The general has turned his blade against the crown." Varric stood up, his voice shaking with a dangerous mixture of sorrow and rage. "You did this, Corin. It was your hand that struck him down. You wear the face of a brother but the soul of a venomous viper." Corin merely smiled, stepping back as the guards rushed forward with heavy iron chains. "Take the Kingslayer to the darkest cell," Corin ordered coldly. And let the realm prepare for a new dawn. And that was when Varric realized this wasn't a nightmare he could wake up from, it was a trap designed to bury him alive. The Grand Council Hall was packed to the absolute brim, the heavy atmosphere suffocating as hundreds of lords, ladies, and commoners gathered to witness the trial of the century. High torches cast long, dancing shadows across the granite walls, making the courtroom look like a living underworld. Corin sat high upon the eagle throne, wearing the stolen crown, his eyes cold as Varric was dragged into the center of the room, his chains rattling loudly against the floor. The high accuser stepped forward, holding up the bloody jeweled dagger. "Behold the evidence of the blackest treason," the accuser shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Found in the very hands of the accused." Varric stood tall despite his wounds, his gaze locked onto his brother. "That blade was a gift given to me by Corin months ago," Varric said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "It vanished from my quarters because it was stolen to frame an innocent man." Corin leaned forward, his voice a smooth, venomous purr. "A desperate lie from a desperate man. Bring forth the witness." A trembling palace servant was led into the hall, her eyes downcast, her voice barely a whisper as she pointed a shaking finger at Varric. "I saw him," she sobbed, tears streaming down her pale face. "In the dead of night, I saw the general steal into the king's chambers with a hidden blade. I swear it before the gods." The crowd erupted into furious, chaotic shouts, demanding blood for the fallen king. Varric looked at the servant, seeing the raw terror in her eyes, realizing her family was likely being held hostage by his brother's men. The emotional weight of the betrayal pressed down on his chest like a mountain, his heart breaking not for his own life, but for the utter destruction of his father's honor and the corruption of the kingdom they loved. If your soul is crying out against this terrible injustice, and you can feel the heavy weight of Varric's broken heart as he stands completely alone against a kingdom of liars, take a brief moment right now to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment saying, "I'm still watching." Your presence keeps this channel alive, so let us know you are standing with the general. "This court has weighed the truth," Corin declared, his voice cutting through the noise like an iron blade. "For the crime of regicide, there can be only one sentence. Death by the rope before sunset." Varric's eyes flashed with a sudden, wild fire, a survival instinct honed over 100 bloody battlefields surging to life. He slammed his chained fists against the stone floor, the sound like a sudden thunderclap. "I will not hang on a liar's word." Varric roared, his voice shaking the dust from the high rafters. "By ancient right, by the blood of the first kings, I claim trial by combat. Let steel decide my fate, and let the gods be my true judge." A collective gasp rippled through the entire assembly. Corin's face darkened instantly, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the arms of the throne. He knew that to deny the ancient right would cause an immediate, violent rebellion among the military. "So be it," Corin hissed, a cruel, confident smile slowly returning to his face. "By ancient right it is granted. Let the gods decide your fate. But you will not fight a standard knight, brother. You will fight the mountain of the realm." The gates to the courtyard arena ground open with a low, ominous groan, a cloud of grey dust billowing into the air as the massive crowd roared from the high ramparts. Varric stood in the center of the dusty circle, his chains removed but his body bruised and aching from days in the dark dungeon. In his right hand, he held a standard iron broadsword, he wore no armor, only a simple linen tunic. From the opposite side of the arena, a towering shadow stepped out from the darkness of the lower tunnels. It was the realm's executioner, a giant of a man known simply as the Iron Bastion. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body encased in massive, overlapping plates of black iron, his face completely hidden behind a terrifying, featureless leather hood. In his massive hands, he carried a double-handed battle axe that looked heavy enough to split a warhorse in two. The giant dragged the weapon along the stone floor, creating a horrific, screeching sound that made the spectators fall completely silent. Varric took a deep, steadying breath, his muscles tensing as he looked at the impossible obstacle before him. The horn sounded, and the giant lunged forward with a speed that defied his massive size, bringing the heavy axe down in a devastating arc. Varric dove to the left, the axe slamming into the stone floor where he had stood just a second before, shattering the solid granite into 1,000 flying pieces. The battle was not a contest of strength, but a brutal, desperate dance between a mountain of muscle and a lifetime of military skill. The giant swung again and again, each blow creating a shockwave of dust and debris that blinded the spectators. Varric parried whenever he could, but the sheer force of the impact sent painful vibrations traveling up his arms, cracking the small bones in his wrists. He managed to slice through a weak point in the giant's leg armor, drawing a dark line of blood, but the monster didn't even flinch. With a sudden, backhanded sweep of his massive iron gauntlet, the giant struck Varric squarely in the chest, sending the general flying across the arena floor. Varric slammed hard into the stone wall, his broadsword slipping from his numbed fingers as he collapsed into the dirt, coughing up bright red blood. Corin leaned forward from the royal box, his eyes gleaming with absolute triumph. "Finish him," Corin whispered to the arena master. The giant walked forward slowly, raising the massive axe high above his head for the final, crushing blow. Varric looked up at the descending steel, his vision blurring, his body screaming in agony. If your breath is completely caught in your throat right now, and you can feel the desperate, adrenaline-fueled terror of this final, shattering moment in the dust, hit that subscribe button immediately, smash the like button, and type, "Don't give up," in the comments to show your support for the general's survival. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Varric did not try to run away from the strike. Instead, he rolled directly toward the giant's feet just as the axe came crashing down. The heavy weapon embedded itself deeply into the wooden arena floor, sticking fast. Before the giant could wrench it free, Varric grabbed his fallen broadsword and drove the blade upward with everything he had left, finding the small, unarmored gap beneath the monster's chin. The steel pierced deep, and the giant froze, a low, wet gasp escaping his hidden throat. The massive axe slipped from his hands, and the iron bastion collapsed forward into the dirt like a falling tower, completely motionless. The arena fell into an absolute, breathless silence. Varric stood over the body, his chest heaving, his body covered in blood and sweat, pointing his crimson blade directly at his brother on the high throne. "I have earned my life," Varric shouted, his voice ringing out across the courtyard. "The gods have spoken. What say you, king?" Corin's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, his grand plan unraveling before his very eyes. He stood up, his voice trembling with forced control. "The trial by combat is ended. By blade and by blood, the victory belongs to General Varric. You have won your life, brother, but you have not won your freedom." Corin raised his hand, and 100 archers suddenly appeared on the ramparts, their bows drawn and aimed directly at Varric's heart. "By royal decree, for the disruption of the peace, you are hereby banished to the northern wall for the rest of your days. Let the cold have what remains of you." The journey to the northern border was a long, agonizing descent into a frozen purgatory. Varric was locked inside a heavy iron cage on the back of a wooden wagon, guarded by a dozen knights who refused to look him in the eye. As the carriage rumbled closer to the monolithic gray stone structure that separated the civilized world from the wild unknown, Varric stared out through the rusty bars at the bleak, snow-covered landscape. He was a general without an army, a son without a father, a man stripped of everything but his burning desire for vengeance. When they finally reached the top of the frozen wall, the captain of the guard unlocked the cage, pushing Varric out onto the icy walkway. "This is your home now, General," the captain said quietly, a hint of pity in his voice. "Try to survive the first winter." Varric looked out over the edge of the massive stone barrier, staring deep into the foggy forests below. That was when the true revelation of his destiny began to take shape out of the freezing mist. A young scout came running along the wall, his face completely pale, his chest heaving with absolute terror. "Sir, you need to see this," the scout stammered, pointing down into the valley. Varric pushed past the guard captain, leaning over the stone parapet. Through the swirling snow, he saw him, a massive, endless sea of black iron and green skin. It was not a simple raiding band of orcs, it was a disciplined, heavily armored military host, moving with the terrifying precision of a professional army. They had siege towers, massive catapults, and beasts of war the size of houses. And at the front of the vanguard stood the massive orc warlord he had seen in his darkest premonitions, holding a banner made of human bones. Varric realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that while his brother was busy playing games for a stolen throne, the entire kingdom was about to be utterly annihilated. The betrayal he had suffered was nothing compared to the slaughter that was coming. He wasn't sent to the wall to die as a prisoner, he was sent here because he was the only man alive who could possibly stop the end of the world. Secure the gates, Varric ordered, his voice instantly reverting to the commanding tone of a true general. The guards looked at him, hesitating for a fraction of a second before the sheer authority in his eyes made them snap to attention. Build the fires, ready the defenses, and send a rider to the capital. Tell my brother that the age of men is ending, and if he wants to keep his stolen crown, he better prepare for war. And that was the exact moment when General Varric understood that his profound loss was not the end of his story, it was merely the brutal, painful beginning of a much greater destiny. True honor cannot be granted by a crown, nor can it be stolen by a liar's clever trap. It is forged in the fires of betrayal and tested in the coldest winters of human experience. As the first drums of the orc host began to echo through the frozen mountains, Varric stood tall against the wind, his broken heart finally hardening into an unbreakable shield for the very people who had cast him out into the dark. Thank you so much for watching this epic cinematic journey from the very beginning to the absolute end. If you want to see the massive battle for the Northern Wall, and find out if Varric gets his ultimate revenge against his traitorous brother, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, smash the like button, and share this video with someone who loves a deep storytelling experience. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know your favorite part of the trial, and we will see you in the next grand chapter.